The Bloc Québécois has given the Liberals an ultimatum. Either push through 2 Bloc bills by the end of October, or the Bloc will negotiate with other parties to potentially topple the government.
Between now and October 29th, we could come to the conclusion that they have not used the time being offered them to successfully go forward with the projects. And then we could know in 1 week or 3 weeks that it has become impossible. And as soon as it becomes impossible, we will know what to do with it.
The 2 bills the Bloc Québécois want passed are Bill C-319, which would raise old age security payments by 10% for seniors between the ages of 65 and 74, and Bill C-282, which exempts supply-managed farm sectors such as dairy, poultry, and eggs from any future trade negotiations. Both must make it through the House, the Senate, and receive royal assent by October 29th in order for the government to have met the Bloc's demands. If the Liberals do meet these demands, the Bloc leader says they can count on his party's support until Christmas. Christine Normandin is the deputy leader of the Bloc Québécois, and she joins me now. It's good to speak with you again. Welcome back to the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me again.
These are significant demands. The OAS will cost $3 to $3.5 billion a year each and every year, and you're tying the hands of future trade negotiators with a supply management condition in return for about 7 weeks of support. Does that seem a bit lopsided in your requests if you're the Liberals?
Well, I think they're quite reasonable requests, actually. When we last met, you might remember that I told you, well, the Bloc is aiming at making gains in the short term, in the next session, and I think what we're asking for today really synthesizes that. It's 2 bills that have already been tabled, already been voted also. That's something that we have to remember. If they are where they are right now, it's because they got a rather large consensus in the House, mostly for Bill C-282, which is already in the Senate. So it passed 3rd reading in the House. So we went with demands that we thought could be met, so they are reasonable. And I think it shows that we are acting in good faith and not just asking for things that we know are deemed impossible to get.
Okay, but so what have you heard from the government that reassures you or doesn't reassure you on their willingness to work with you on this? I mean, the supply management issue, they voted for that. That seems like something that is a doable thing. Mm-hmm. Old age security, though, is going to cost a lot of money.
It is going to cost a lot of money, and for what you were asking about what we heard, well, we're on the first day of our ultimatum, as you call it, so there's still a bit of time ahead so we can have discussions. But on that specific bill, it has passed through committee, and on committee report stage, it was unanimous. So it gives us a sense that there's at least a willingness to have that bill go further. So it's all in the end of the Liberals now, and we'll see how they respond to it. And if we see that it's impossible that we make gains, as we heard our leader previously mention, we'll know what to do with that. And he basically said, well, let the Liberals go get themselves a campaign bus.
So on some of this, obviously the government can control it, but the Senate does play a role, certainly at least in the supply management side of things. With the changes this government has made to the way they interact with their senators, they can't whip a vote there and can't force it through. I mean, could a slow process in the Senate be a deal breaker for the Bloc Québécois, or would you understand that if the government gives you their commitment that they'll live up to these terms? Mm-hmm.
Well, we based our request and the timeline on things that we've seen in the past. We base it on good faith and good discussions. We do hope the Liberals can have discussions and request themselves to the Senate, even though indeed they're supposed to be independent. But we've seen in the past bills move rather quickly as soon as they were out of the House on 3rd reading, such as in a week or so. So we know it is doable when there's good faith and discussions along the process. So that's why we made it around the end of October. It gives a bit of time, not too much, not enough, somewhere in between, and we think it is doable. But we'll see day to day how it goes and and what's the level of good faith from all parties.
You say good faith a couple of times in that answer. That seems to be in short supply here in Ottawa these days. You may feel you can achieve it with the Liberals in your conversations on these things, but there are other parties in the Senate, there are other parties in the House that can use procedural tactics and other things to slow this down and delay this. And you know, the Conservatives won an election, so there is no incentive for them to cooperate with your ultimatum to the Liberals. I mean, how do you overcome those obstacles if you see other parties intervening in this process that could force the Liberals to miss your deadline?
Well, then we will know if it's, for example, as you mentioned, the Conservatives who stalled the process in the Senate, and they are considered one party. They are not independent. So they'll be speaking on both sides of the mouth. I don't know if that expression exists in English. Yep. But since they voted in favor of it in the House and then they would stall it at the Senate, it would send a message. They could still vote against it, but stalling it would be a different issue, and would see the kind of people would be dealing with in an election. And I think that would also send a message to the voters. So there's a bit of good faith implied, but we'll also see the true nature of parties along the process, and I think that's important as well.
I spoke to the parliamentary budget officer today in a conversation that we'll show later in the show, and we asked him about the price tag on this request, because he has done the costing of this legislation when you presented it, your MP on this, and it's about $16.1 billion over the next 5 years, and it will grow even more after that as more people hit the age of 65, as the baby boomers get older. You look at the increases coming from dental care, you look at the increases coming from pharmacare. Is this affordable, your request? It pushes the deficit well over $40 billion potentially.
Well, what we see is that the government could have saved money if it were not intruding in jurisdiction of Quebec and doubling the bureaucracy in many programs. But it's also a matter of choices. And just for example, in the past 2 years, since 2022, there was something like $83 billion sent to big oil companies on tax credits, fiscal gifts. So basically what we're saying is that, well, maybe you could use some of the money you're putting in the big oil companies' pockets and put it in the senior pockets instead. So it's all a matter of choices, and I think there's still some room to make better decisions, and then make sure we put an end to the discrimination between two classes of seniors, because the cost of living is the same for both 65 to 74 than it is for 75 years and older.
The government has committed to phasing out fossil fuel subsidies. I know it is going slower than I think even they would like, and certainly you would like. But those are costs that are anticipated to go away unless there is a change in government and a change in policy. An increase to the old age security is a permanent structural expense, though, right? And if you look at the budget, Ms. Normandin, about $100 billion by 2028 in transfers to seniors of a budget that's less than $400 billion. I mean, we are getting up to a point, though, where the support for the older generations will be a vastly significant component of the budget. Do you have any concerns about it going so heavily in that direction?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, it could go really faster with regards to phasing out of on fossil fuel. And that's one of the biggest expenses. When you look at it, it was just that. The money put on fossil fuels is 40% of the last deficit. It is a lot. It's not negligible. So I think there's a lot of money that could be used there now and in the future as well. And as I mentioned earlier, if we just stopped doubling on bureaucracy because we're intruding the fields of jurisdiction of the provinces, that could save a lot of money as well. And there's plenty of other places to be looked at, but in a very near future, fossil fuel is an easy one, and bureaucracy on doubling in jurisdiction is another easy one. So
what happens October 29th if the Liberals haven't met your standard here? If they make a move in some, do you go to an immediate confidence vote? Because I know Mr. Blanchet has talked about not wanting to have an election over the Christmas holiday season. So you don't have much time after the 29th of October to figure out what you're going to do with the other parties, and it takes you, the Conservatives, and the NDP to bring down the government. So what do you do October 29th if you don't get what you want?
Well, I think we'll know a bit before October 29 where it is heading, and we're open to negotiations earlier than we just won't wake up on the morning of the 29th and, well, let's start talking. I do hope there's room for negotiation before that, and we can start maybe managing the weeks to come after October 29th. So it will be a process. It's not, well, a different step every day. We'll adapt as it goes on, but there will have to be discussions amongst parties, and it's been mentioned already, and it's how it worked in the past when parties were to topple a minority government. They had to talk amongst themselves. So we are more than open for discussion with all parties on all these questions.
But, you know, when Mr. Blanchet was here on the show last week, he said it's not his job to accelerate, Pierre Poilievre's ambitions, essentially, to make it easier for Pierre Poilievre to become prime minister. If you do move to the confidence issue, by late October, early November, you're effectively doing that if you help trigger an election, are you not? I mean, is that where you're prepared to go, to have an election sometime, a campaign throughout November with a vote in December? Is that what you're prepared to do?
But the situation would be different. It would have been after we have tried and indeed failed to make some gains. That was the first priority we mentioned. We're not about just giving Pierre Poilievre a government for the sake of giving him a government.
Understood.
We were there aiming at making gains. But if we see it is inevitable that we won't be making any gains for Quebecers and Canadians with the two bills that will be discussed. Well, we'll put the decision in the hands of the voters at some point. So it's not about either preserving a government or giving a government to another party. It's really about making gains and opportunities we have.
Well,
and that's always how we analyze things. Any motions or whatever will be on the table, we'll analyze it in the lens of what's good for Quebec, we vote for it, and what's not, we vote against. So that's not changing.
So what happens then in January? They give you these two pieces of legislation to meet these two demands and add billions of dollars to their spending plan. You give them 2 months of peace. Then you come back in January, what, with a whole new set of demands? I mean, what happens? Is it going to be a series of episodes of brinksmanship between the Bloc and the Liberals, do you think?
I guess we'll have to see, and we'll have to go with what's on the table also. As I mentioned, what we're asking for is bills that have already passed a certain level and have gained acceptance by all parties. So we'll still be fighting for things we've been fighting for in the past years that are not new. Anything we'd be discussing wouldn't be perfectly new, and we'll still have opposition days in the event we're not in an election, and we'll ask for things that are good for Quebec, and we'll vote against things that are not. So that won't change, and we won't compromise on what we are. We won't make deals that would make intrusions in the jurisdiction of Quebec, for example. So we'll take it one step at a time in the future after that.
One last thing I just want to ask you about. There was a tense moment in the House of Commons today during question period where the Prime Minister came very close to getting thrown out by the Speaker for his failure to immediately withdraw some comments. He alleges that comments coming from the opposition during question period, from the Conservatives, I should clarify, were homophobic in nature. Did you see and hear what set the Prime Minister off? What did you see and what do you know about what happened in Parliament today?
I couldn't hear it myself. There was a lot of noise already in the House, so I wouldn't speculate on what was said. I've heard from other people who have heard what was said, but in any cases, it gives you a sense of how things are going in the House. Only 2 days after we voted for a motion to remember ourselves that we have to be respectful and of others and of the decorum. So some wishes like that fly by really fast, unfortunately. But at the same time, it was once again an example of the Bloc being the adult in the House. It's kind of weird coming from an independentist party, but yeah, unfortunately, we can see it and we can feel it's really tense. So it's going to be a heated session this fall.
I think heated is probably an understatement. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's Normandin, the Deputy House Leader of the Bloc Québécois. Thank you.
A pleasure.
Well, the Liberal minority government passed its first test of confidence since the end of its deal with the NDP. And first being the key word, because the Conservatives are promising to bring forward a whole lot more. And the Bloc, which supported the government today, has laid out two demands in exchange for their support beyond the end of October. So, will the Liberals do what it takes to meet the Bloc's October 29th deadline? Karina Gould is the government House Leader, and she joins us now from just outside the House of Commons. Minister Gould, welcome back to Power and Politics.
Thanks for having me, David.
The offer put on the table, or the demand put on the table by the Bloc Québécois, two significant pieces of legislation, one which will cost billions of dollars in return for 2 months of support for peace, essentially. Are you going to meet their demands?
Well, David, as I've said numerous times, I A, don't negotiate in public, but B, I speak with all of the House leaders from all of the political parties, even the Conservatives, even Andrew Scheer on a regular basis. And that's my job as the House Leader, to try and make this minority parliament work.
Right, but this would be a whole of cabinet decision, right? I mean, the finance minister, the prime minister, this is $3 to $3.5 billion a year in extra spending on the old age security increase they're talking about. Your government's committed to keeping the deficit to less than 1% of GDP, under $40 billion, and declining over time. Meeting this demand makes those targets very difficult to meet. Is your government willing to budge off that?
So as I said, I'm not someone who's going to negotiate in public, but what I can say is that we're very proud of the record that we have when it comes to supporting Canadian seniors. Remember that one of the first things that we did when we came into office back in 2015 was to raise the guaranteed income supplement by 10% for seniors, and we did raise OAS for those 75 and over. And there's a very strong policy imperative for that, because we know that seniors, once they reach the age of 75, their retirement savings have decreased and their costs have increased. So there was a very strong policy rationale for why we did that.
The argument, though, from the Bloc Québécois is that the cost of living circumstances have changed, and seniors in that 65 to 74 cohort, some who may be working, but some who are on fixed incomes potentially and at lower income levels, their costs have changed dramatically, and they need the bump up to keep up with the cost of living. Do you accept that argument and that rationale from Mr. Blanchet and his party as valid?
Look, we know that this is a challenging time for Canadians of all ages right now, but that's why, we also made those important policy decisions throughout our time in government. So, we know that this is something that the Bloc is pushing, but as I said, my job is to negotiate and to talk with all of the House leaders from all of the different political parties and try and make this minority parliament work.
But this is $16.1 billion over the next 5 years. That is not an insignificant ask. So at first blush, I mean, is this something, I know you're going to say you're not going to negotiate in public, but we're talking about the potential falling of the government, the future of benefits for Canadian seniors, and the possibility of a fall election campaign while there's a bunch of provincial elections and a U.S. election happening at the same time. So these are anxious times, and there's some Canadians out there who are concerned about this. So, I mean, when do these negotiations start? When do these conversations start? And is this something the House leaders do, or does this have to go to the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, for conversations?
So look, I know Canadians are anxious, and I know there are a lot of Canadians that actually don't want to have a fall election. And so my message to them is that I am doing everything I can to make this minority parliament work. Despite the antics of the Conservatives, you started off by saying that the government won this vote today. But I think what it also demonstrated is that there are three political parties in the House of Commons, the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc, that want to get to work for Canadians. And there's only one political party that is really just thinking about their own political ambitions as opposed to how we can actually work to serve Canadians.
On the mechanics of meeting this October 29th deadline, though, that the Bloc has set, I mean, you can directionally agree to it in your conversations. The Prime Minister, whoever, can signal, yep, we're on board, we'll do it. The Senate, though, plays a role in this, and Senator Peter Beam, on the study of the supply management bill, he says this will take some time. So how do you get something through the Senate when you no longer have a control of the Senate because of the independent Senate structure and meet that deadline? How do you even approach meeting that timeline?
Well, I mean, that is a terrific question because the Senate is independent. This is a bill that did pass unanimously through the House of Commons. So I think that is something that senators should think about. There is a will of the democratically elected House that passed this piece of legislation, and it has been sitting in the Senate for some time now. I think it was clear that there is strong support for supply management across political parties. So, we don't have a way to direct senators because we have independent senators and there's no government caucus in the Senate. So I think it's a really important question that you raise, but what I can reiterate is that it was passed unanimously by the House of Commons, and that is something for senators to consider.
So your expectation would be that the Senate should defer to the will of the elected House on something like this and move it fast, especially if the confidence of the government potentially depends on it.
Well, putting aside the second part, I mean, just in general, the Senate is there as a chamber of sober second thought, but there is, the will of the democratically elected House that they do need to take into consideration as they are considering how they move forward with legislation.
I'm wondering, though, I spoke with John Manley yesterday, who was a former Liberal finance minister and deputy prime minister, former head of the Business Council, and he is pretty worried about supporting this restriction on future trade negotiations, including anything about supply management, because come 2026, you have a renewal of the new NAFTA, and we know that Donald Trump and his administration took aim at supply management, and it always is a source of tension with the U.S. on this, even if Kamala Harris wins. So, I mean, how comfortable are you really in binding the hands of future governments and trade negotiators when the whole trading relationship of the United States, for example, could collide with the protection of supply management?
Well, look, supply management is a really important initiative that we have in Canada and system that supports our agricultural industry, whether it's dairy, poultry, turkey, eggs, and it creates a really strong foundation in rural economies, and it supports our farmers. So, all political parties in this country support supply management and have supported supply management, through past trade negotiations. And I think, particularly for us as Liberals, when it came to renegotiating NAFTA with President Trump, we were very clear that, supply management was something that we were going to protect because we know how important it is for our agricultural industry, for the rural economy, and to support our farmers and to make sure that we have good Canadian food grown here at home. So this is something that, I think we feel very strongly that we do need to protect because it is something that is actually really good for Canadians and the Canadian economy.
Okay, so you'll work this out with the Bloc Québécois between now and October 29th, presumably one way or another. The other challenge you have is the Conservatives' persistence in trying to bring down this government. I know you survived the confidence motion today. There's another opposition day tomorrow. When you were on last week, I asked you when would they have the first opportunity to bring you down, and you wouldn't give me a specific date. But now you have scheduled 2 opposition days for the Conservatives in this week alone. They only get 5 for the whole fall. Are you going to stack them all up and front load them in the early parts of this sitting while you're still dealing with the Bloc and the NDP to run them out of their opportunities to do these confidence motions? Because it looks like it with 2 in this week alone.
Well, you'll just have to wait and see, David. It's day by day for me in this Parliament. But what I do think is that it does seem a little bit lame that the Conservatives just, a couple of hours after they lose one motion of non-confidence are putting forward another motion of non-confidence. It seems a little bit desperate from my vantage point. But, we'll have to see how things go day by day, week by week. That's how minority parliaments work.
But you set the timing of these, right? So they have to take the days when you give them.
They can take the days, but they can choose what to do with the days, right? So I'm not a conservative strategist. That's up to them. But, it seems to me that it feels a bit desperate. It feels a bit pathetic to do the same thing again when they could, focus on another issue that's important to Canadians. But what it says to me is that for them, this is a political game and it's about their own political ambitions, and the rest of the parties here actually want to work and get stuff done for Canadians. Okay,
you avoided an election today, but I think in some ways we saw a preview of what that campaign might look like when the Prime Minister came very close to getting thrown out of the House by the Speaker today over his comments about homophobic crap coming from the opposition. This was an exchange in a question about the new residence spot for the New York Consul General, Tom Clark. There are some comments shouted from the Conservative benches. This is confirmed by the Conservatives, by the way, saying, did Tom get the top bunk when asking about whether the Prime Minister visited it? And Garnet Jennis, one of the Conservative MPs, asking, did meetings take place in the tub? Because there's a quite lavish tub in the new residence. The Prime Minister called that homophobic. He attacked it. What did you see and hear as this went down, and what are your thoughts on this episode as a final point?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is just par for the course from the Conservatives and how they act in the House of Commons. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, they say many more things that are just as bad, if not worse. And I think that, you know, they need to absolutely do better in terms of how they comport themselves in the House of Commons. And I think it was right for the Prime Minister to call that out. And what we saw from their benches was that they thought it was funny, right? And I think that that is immature. I think it's irresponsible. And I think it shows their true colors when it comes to, again, taking this place for a joke, which actually is an extremely important institution for Canadians. And I think Canadians expect better of all parliamentarians, but particularly Conservative members of Parliament who think that it's appropriate to make these kinds of jokes and to denigrate people when in fact they should be, you know, rising above that and acting like respectable people.
Government House Leader Karina Gould, we're out of time. We'll have you back on the next confidence vote, which is coming any day now. Thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, David, for having me.
Well, the Liberals may have survived the Conservative non-confidence motion today, but now there's a new deadline that's been put on the table as the Bloc Québécois laid out its demands for the government. Either push through 2 bloc bills by the end of October, or the Bloc will negotiate with the other parties to topple the government.
Between now and October 29th, we could come to the conclusion that they have not used the time being offered them to successfully go forward with the projects. And then we could know in 1 week or 3 weeks that it has become impossible. And as soon as it becomes impossible, we will know what to do with it.
The 2 bills that the Bloc Québécois wants passed are Bill C-319, which would raise old age security payments by 10% for seniors between the ages of 65 and 74, and Bill C-282, which exempts supply-managed farm sectors such as dairy, poultry, and eggs from any future trade negotiations. Both must make it through the House, through the Senate, and receive royal assent by October 29th in order for the government to have met the Bloc's demands. Now, if the Liberals do meet the demands, the Bloc leader says they can count on his party's support until Christmas.
Every proposal that's made, is something that is considered. But, I don't think it's helpful to issue ultimatums. I think that what is helpful is to demonstrate that Parliament is focused on Canadians and not politics.
So will the Liberals be able to live up to the Bloc's ultimatum, and if they can, should they? Let's talk about that with the Power Panel. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communication strategist. Here with me in the studio, Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist. And Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of The Hill Times. Good to see you all. Amanda, so the offer on the table is 2 months of parliamentary peace in return for the low price of $3.5 billion a year in increased OAS payments. Do you think the Liberals will meet that? Do you think they should meet that?
And if they don't meet that, then all we want for Christmas is an election, because that's where we would be headed, right? If we're talking about October 29th, and Blanchette had said, well, then we could wrap up an election by Christmas, as if that's what everybody is looking forward to on their holidays. Listen, the supply management bill, as you know, has already gone through the House. It has the support of the Liberals. It's being reviewed by Senate. I think that Karina Gould said today that there are discussions with the Bloc on their other demand. But I think what's really fascinating, whether or not they do it, I don't know, but with a $16 billion price tag. But I think what is really fascinating is the power dynamics and shifts that are happening happening in the House of Commons right now, right? Like you go from the NDP who ostensibly used their moment up and now are in the back pages. We're not talking about them anymore. It feels like they have zero power. And suddenly, and we have the Conservatives, obviously, who are trying to push these non-confidence votes forward. They want the headlines on that. They don't get what they want. They end up, obviously, the motion isn't passed today, which only reveals that there is confidence in the government. So that doesn't work, backfires. And instead, we're now faced with the Bloc, who seems to take their power position, making their demands, really talking about what they believe is best for Quebecers, so having their moment to talk about that. And an otherwise scenario where I don't know that Blanchette would get that kind of coverage, right? Would get that kind of airtime. So I thought they're doing what the NDP should have done to be able to use this critical time when the House resumes to be pushing for the things that really matter to them, as opposed to, ripping up the agreement the way that the NDP did and sort of putting themselves out of the conversation.
Tim, I would say what confidence was expressed in the government today has a very large asterisk next to it based on what everyone else is saying and the ultimatums that are on the table for this to continue for very long. But the Liberals have these fiscal anchors of a deficit of no more than 1% of GDP, a declining debt to GDP ratio over time, and not going over a $40 billion deficit. The Bloc demand blows those away if they meet it.
Look, don't be unfair to Amanda. You'll take confidence at this price.
Oh, look,
wherever you can get it, and she didn't have to spend 16.
Thank you, Tim.
She didn't have to spend 16 billion yet to get it. Okay, that's not a cheap one.
Yeah.
I love Mr. Blanchette. He has pushed Monty Hall away, and let's make a deal to we will know what to do with it. Well, he's doing what others have done already and worked to a certain degree. I mean, at one point there was the Liberal Atlantic Caucus who said if you don't fix things on carbon pricing, carbon tax, we're going to have issues, and they got a carve out.
Mission accomplished on that
more
one,
problems,
right?
The NDP said if you want this, you get that. So they're playing to a prime minister who has demonstrated in the past that he will do deals. The question is, will he do this one? Is it too expensive? Is it worth it, particularly if it's only going to maybe empower the Bloc in Quebec, where he needs to win if he's going to hold on in the next election or not? And, how much is bluster and how much is real? Mr. Blanchette has got the best seat in Parliament. Look, right now, if an election were held, he could end up being, as Lucien Bouchard once was, the leader of the opposition. Why wouldn't he throw all his chips on the table right now and see with a prime minister and a government with sagging polls? But, I don't think he's going to get precisely what he wants, but I think the government will probably find a way to try and do something. You talked about the fiscal anchors, but the government hasn't been wedded to any of its core central policies, really, other than carbon pricing. It's been willing to throw them away if survival's at play. So.
But it seems to me like the finance department is probably a little bit worried about credit rating, because that was the talk leading up to the budget, and this would move them off their fiscal track, which they were adamant on staying on, Jordan, in the last budget. And, I guess to sort of channel Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, all the talk will be about whether they can do it. Should they do it? They get 2 months of peace for a big commitment on the bottom line.
Well, I mean, that's really going to go down to how weak they're feeling, right? So, of course, the Bloc right now, they're having a bit of a moment. For the last 2 years, because of the confidence and supply agreement with the NDP, they really haven't had much of the limelight. So now with their win in La Salle and Marverdun, they've got this moment where they now have this power, and absolutely Blanchette's out there he's having the most fun of anybody in Parliament right now, I think is really evident. But I would read this maybe more as an opening offer from them. This is not necessarily the final form. So we'll see. There's going to have to be some room for negotiation there. But of course, it's also not entirely do or die for the government. The Liberals can also still work with the NDP. Right. So there is still a moment there for Mr. Singh and the NDP to kind of take that position back, and these two parties to play off each other somewhat when the government is looking for a dance partner. But right now, the Bloc is having a really strong moment in Quebec. The Liberals are at an absolute weak point with Pablo Rodriguez's departure as well, all coming at the same period. It's a tough moment for them there.
Sherelle, October 29th, that's when Christine Normandin said earlier that they'll have some conversations on the negotiations leading up to that. They'll have a sense of where it goes. But if you get to the 29th and then have to start talking about the conditions under which you bring the government down, You're talking like Christmas holiday election, which I don't think the Bloc wants to do. I mean, do you think this sets the stage for a fall election potentially, or are we punting this into 2025?
Well, if we're going to, be quoting Jurassic Park, I guess you could hold on to your butts, I suppose, because, it opens the door for who knows what. And
yeah, that's true.
When you're dangling these types of things over someone's head, it's like, well, do you want a Christmas election? Do you want to be the person that, everybody's going to be mad at? We can't have a summer election because nobody's paying attention. We can't have a Christmas election because, well, that's not fair. It's the holidays. We can't do that to people. Yada, yada. It goes on and on and on. And there's going to be more of these non-confidence votes. 2006
has hello, by the way. Was it 2006? Was it Christmas?
Yes,
yeah. Sorry, not to derail you, but we did have that super long campaign. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So those are the things that everybody was going to be thinking about. But at this point, the Bloc has essentially given the government 3 sitting weeks to say, come up with something that we can agree on, or, we're going to maybe put another ultimatum at your feet. And as Jordan said, obviously there is still the NDP. They could potentially be in play, but there is also an agreement in the Senate to have pharmacare done by Thanksgiving.
Right.
So that's, another couple weeks after that, if the NDP don't feel like they need anything else from the Liberals, if obviously there's still the expansion of dental care that they want, but if pharmacare is a done deal, if they don't feel like they have anything else to gain, then sure, that definitely becomes more problematic for the Liberals, because if the Bloc are saying, well, you can't give us what we want, and let's not forget that the C319, no Liberals voted for that bill, in support of that bill to top up old age security for that age group. It needs a royal recommendation. That's something that's potentially, they're saying they're talking about it, but it's not something that they really had on their radar. The supply management bill, that's in the Senate. There is, of course, a way forward, potentially, if they really wanted to push and apply pressure on the senators to get that done. But that's the Senate. That's a whole other kettle of fish. So you kind of feel like they've set them up to fail a little bit with this.
Yeah. Look, when the theme of your budget is fairness for every generation, you turn around and say, and here's $3 billion a year for the boomers. That is essentially what this amounts to, and it will grow as more boomers retire. So it is a generational challenge potentially for the Liberals, though, eventually we'll qualify for that, as we all. Tim, you're probably getting it now. But, it does become a challenge.
Coming after you there.
All right. So my cheap shot at my fellow Newfoundlander was a way of setting up this next segment of what we saw in the House of Commons today. Because, look, if everyone goes by their rational self-interest, the Liberals, the Bloc, and the ADP will find a way to keep this going and exchange things. But as we saw today, sometimes that doesn't work. Justin Trudeau, he avoided an early election today, but we had this tense moment during question period where the Prime Minister almost got thrown out, and it's given us sort of a look. We don't have the clip, Jerry, you're saying? No, okay. All right. Well, what I was trying to set up with dramatic effect. Sherelle, there was this moment today where someone from the Conservatives, in questioning about the purchase of the new residence for Tom Clark, said something to the Prime Minister. There was a comment, we've got it? Okay, I've treaded water enough to get it ready. Here we go. Here's what happened in question period today.
Colleagues, just as I said before, the Right Honourable Prime Minister from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, don't worry. On this side of the House, we're used to casual homophobic comments from the other side of the House. Mr. Speaker, what is it about the...
And I'm going to ask the Honourable Member, please, to withdraw that comment, start his question again, and let us presume the better natures of all members of Parliament here.
Standing up to bullies requires us to call them out on their crap sometimes, and that's what I will do.
I'll invite the Prime Minister once again to rise on his feet. And thank you.
I will happily withdraw my comment if the member who suggested that I was sharing a bathtub with Tom Clark stands up, takes responsibility for his...
Okay, so no election today, but maybe a taste of what we're going to see in the next one, Sherelle. I mean, the heckling from across the floor. Someone said, did Tom get the top bunk when questioning whether the Prime Minister went to visit Tom Clark at the new residence? And it was Garnet Jennings who made the bathtub comment. And what the Conservatives are saying is that he shouted out, are they having the meetings in the tub? The Prime Minister took that as obviously a homophobic thing about, two men sharing a tub, because it's quite the expensive tub. What happened today? What do you think of what we saw in question period?
Well, I think one thing we saw is definitely kind of the light leaving the Speaker's eyes as he so desperately wanted to move past it, but that clearly didn't happen. We did see the Prime Minister almost get kicked out. He didn't actually withdraw. I think the part of the remarks where his comments where he called it homophobic, kind of skated past it on withdrawing the crap part of it. But yeah, this is something that I think we are going to see more and more. We did get a little hint that, the Prime Minister was going to be a little more feisty, going to fight back a little harder. They want to draw this comparison between the Liberals and the Conservatives. They're saying, this is supposed to be your government in waiting. We are going to call out as we see it anything that we think is going to make them look bad. And, heckling in the House it's not a new thing. It never goes smoothly. And if you're going to be making a remark and a joke, it had better be, precise and it better be funny, or it's going to come off like they're trying to say now it wasn't homophobic. In a room full of people yelling, it's really hard to get that across.
It's interesting, though, Amanda, because whatever was actually said and whatever its intention, it was caught on a mic, but it was off camera and you don't see it. But you do see the Liberal Speaker dragging the Liberal Prime Minister to his feet and demanding he withdraw it, and the Prime Minister kind of trying to do a qualified withdrawal like Pierre Poilievre did months back when he was kicked out, and eventually landing on a spot where they moved past it. But this is going to be all over Conservative socials mocking Justin Trudeau. So, I don't know if it's a gain for him, this fight back today, but it speaks to what is happening in the Parliament of Canada on a daily basis right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think my daughter's second grade class has more maturity than what we see in the House of Commons right now. And it's, we can laugh because it's entertaining, but the truth is it really just deprives Canadians of the kind of debates that should be had. That being said, I think that this is what we were expecting when the Liberals sort of telegraphed the idea that Trudeau was going to be unleashed. And this is the idea of him really calling out and framing Poilievre, or framing the Conservatives, as bullies. So it's a word that he's using here. I think we're going to hear it a lot more. And kind of projecting himself as a person who's going to stand up to it, stand up to that kind of rhetoric, stand up to those kind of criticisms and accusations and really vile insinuations that were made in the House of Commons today. I don't know that backfired. I think that it's probably a decent look for the Prime Minister to be seen as somebody who is not weak, the way that the NDP has framed them, but as somebody who is strong and willing to stand up to some of the rhetoric that really Canadians are growing tired of.
Yeah, the two phrases, Jordan, you keep hearing now is we're going to stand up to bullies. All the parties are saying that in some form or another, and we're the adults in the room. That's what they're all saying in some form or another. But you also saw there in that question period and the fallout of that, the Prime Minister also today trying to brand the Conservatives as just unserious, sloganeering politicians hungry for power. This is the argument they have sort of settled on, at least by what we saw today.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to remember is that question period and what's happening in the House and everything that's going to happen this fall in the House, of which this is just a taste. Like, we're in for a lot of this. It's all theater. Each party is playing to their own base and to their own audience when they're having these exchanges. It's not for better or for worse. It's not about the debate that's happening in the room. It's about an entirely external audience. It's about driving fundraising. And it's also about what the Conservatives have been doing is pushing these clips on social media very effectively in terms of mobilizing their base. I think that the challenge for the Liberals in trying to position Trudeau as a fighter and sort of being more aggressive and standing up is that so much of the negativity around their own numbers is centered on him personally.
Yeah.
So when you start to put more negative things in his mouth and having him say that, that's something that can over time backfire when people are already feeling negative about him. So it's a bit of a risky play on their part. It's also questionable how much Canadians are going to see of it, unless it's being pushed towards them with some money. And there's not a lot of evidence that that's been happening so far.
Well, I don't know if Justin Trudeau can bring his positives back up, Tim, but certainly there is a goal to bring Poilievre's down even further and drive his negatives up. And I know this is theater, what we see in question, but this is This is just politics now. This is the way it is. In the House, out of the House, in every speech, in every interview, in every scrum, it has just become this rabid insult fest and accusation fest. Like, there is not a serious conversation happening about
Yeah, and
politics.
talk yes on that, but let's talk about the whatever that was today. First of all, if you're sending out explanations of what it is you were trying to say and it was a joke, and you were describing it as a joke, it probably backfired. I don't know if Garnet or his staff are in line to be comedy writers anytime for Stephen Colbert or anybody else. What the Conservatives need to watch is, while their anger and frustration as they portray it in the way you've just described, David, particularly towards the Prime Minister, works with a lot of people. Because there are a lot of people that are angry at the Prime Minister, rightly or wrongly. They are. You got to kind of figure out where the line is. And today, in the way it was described, I think they went over the line a little bit, if not a lot, depending on your perspective. And while they have a big lead and all of those things, and they still want to make sure that the desire for change remains, it's this sort of stuff in little bits that can add up for them. So they're going to probably have to demonstrate some more discipline there. The whole country may be angry at different things, but they don't all loathe Justin Trudeau the way Conservatives would like people to loathe Justin Trudeau. So you got to be careful with that. For the Prime Minister, I get why he responded the way he did, but he's also in an interesting place. This is a government who rightly has lectured sports organizations and everybody else about maltreatments within their organization, who've done an okay job, if not a good job, of saying you can't behave that way. Well, when the top person is taking the bait from the other side and coming back aggressively like that, if that happened in any of those organizations they've accused of not behaving properly, that person will be let go too. So you got to remember all of this. And your point about seriousness, yeah, look, it's just so frigging frustrating given the stuff that's out there. It's okay to want to be angry. It's okay to want to manifest change, but can we focus on an issue for a change instead of people?
But even on this issue that this was related to, Sherelle, the new residence they bought in New York, look, $9 million is a lot of money. It's a lot of money. But the one they're going to sell, to buy the $9 million one, they're hoping to sell for $13 million, and it needs renovations, and they save those costs. So it's a net savings of $7 million, according to the calculations the government put out, that are bureaucrats, not the politicians. And Tom Clark doesn't get to keep this, right? So yesterday, CTV and Bell Media were lectured about the importance of facts and proper context. Now, I know splicing the video is different. That is a totally different thing. But they were also upset about the framing of the story, that the non-confidence motion was about dental care when it's actually about a bunch of things. This is a government building, a government purchase being bought with a sale at a profit, that they're turning into this allegation of scandal and then implying that people are in tubs and having to explain that it's not homophobic. It's an interesting day after contrast.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, just yesterday, everybody agreed, unanimous consent. Let's all agree that we are adults and, name calling and good behavior, and these are the things that we should be modeling. That was yesterday. This is today. This is where we are today. So, we kind of knew even as soon as you saw the motion, it was like, well, that's not going to hold water. No. That's because this has been where we're going. The very fact that opposition has chosen to go down this route on this particular residence and have decided to pick apart, the specific people, the Consul General who says that he didn't have anything to do with the purchase. This is part of governing. And I'm sure that, the next government, there are going to be things that they would wish that maybe people didn't look at quite so closely and try to poke holes in, even though they're completely legitimate, just for the sake of politics. But that's where we are. That's the environment. You can talk about misinformation, you can talk about disinformation, but everybody's peddling in it.
Yep, and you're right. That vote on conduct in Parliament, I quoted Jeff Goldblum, I'll quote Aristotle, we are what we repeatedly do. It's your actions that define you, not your words and not your feelings.
And by the way, on bathtubs, this program once had a prominent bathtub sponsor, an adjustable bathtub. you know.
Yeah, it's walk in.
For me, it was
You've got
for
one.
me because,
Yeah.
you know, I got one.
Yeah, exactly.
I want you to take that back. I want that now, Mr. Speaker. Get him to take that back.
Yeah, there's a statute of limitations on some things, Tim. Okay, we're out of time. We've got to say goodbye. We'll probably back next week to talk about the next confidence vote and fight inside the House of Commons. Amanda Alvaro, Tim Powers, Jordan Likeness, and Cheryl Even, thanks so much for being here for the Power Panel.